Hello, friends. Welcome again to Jewels of Truth. In our last study, I brought up the fact that the Pope and the Vatican were very much involved in encouraging the United States of America to split into two separate states, North and South. I am happy and I am glad and I'm proud to live in the United States of America. I am proud of our heritage. I'm proud of our history. And it grieves me that anyone would want to come into this country to split us into two separate nations. But that's exactly what the Vatican attempted to do. And just in case some of you maybe did not watch the first video where I read the letter which the Pope Pius IX, in a letter to the President of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis. He said, "We have just received with suitable welcome the persons sent by you to place in our hands your letter dated 23rd September last, 1863. Not slight was the pressure we experienced when we learned from those persons and the letter with what feelings of joy and gratitude you were animated, illustrious and honorable President." And by calling Jefferson Davis illustrious and honorable President, they were encouraging this split, this war between North and South. When we were informed of your letters to our venerable brother John, Archbishop of New Orleans, and John, Archbishop of New York. Okay, and he called him, "It is particularly agreeable to us that you, illustrious and honorable President, and your people are animated by the same desire for peace." Of course, he's speaking peace, but while at the same time underhandedly going behind the scenes, him and his people there, and encouraging this split between North and South, because the Vatican wanted to conquer the United States of America. Okay, so I reread that letter to you, but I want to go here now to the next heading, and this is from the book, The Vatican-Washington-Moscow Alliance by Averell Manhattan. Okay, so under the heading Formal and Complete Recognition, Mann, in his letter addressed to J.P. Morgan, that's Dudley Mann, a prominent Confederate diplomat, he wrote, "The influence of that measure, the Pope's letter, on our behalf is incalculable." Okay, so it was the Pope's letter was this influence was huge. Okay, so Dudley Mann, in his letter addressed to J.P. Benjamin, then Secretary of State for the Confederate States of America, described the effect of the papal recognition thus, quote, "In all intelligent British circles, our recognition by the Sovereign Pontiff is considered formal and complete. It is believed that the earnest wishes expressed by His Holiness will be regarded as little less than imperative commands by the vast portion of the human family which esteem him as the Vicar of Christ." In another letter dated March 11, 1864, as also addressed to Benjamin, Mann declared, quote, "To the immortal honor of the Catholic Church, it is now engaged in throwing every obstacle that it can justly create in the way of the prosecution of the war by the Yankee guerrillas." Okay, they were throwing every obstacle that it could possibly create in the way of the Yankee guerrillas and being successful in winning this war. The Yankee guerrillas would be, of course, the northern state, the Union Army. He then goes further, referring to the direct connections which the papacy had with the Vatican. He reports that he had talks not only with the Vatican Secretary of State, but also with the Holy Father himself, the Antichrist. This person, the writer of this book, doesn't say the Antichrist. I'm saying the Antichrist. As a result of these colloquies, he says, he has entertained a constant belief that there will be a marked reduction in the number of foreign recruits for the Union armies. To correctly evaluate the weight of the Pope's support for the South, it must be viewed in the light of the military situation of the time. The moment when the fate of both the North and the South were in balance. During the first part of the Civil War, the forces of the Union had been tremendously hard-pressed by the Southern armies. The latter, meaning the Southern armies, at one time appeared to be on the crest of victory that would lead to final success. Thank God, dear people, thank God that the South was not successful and that the North won this war, and the Vatican was not successful in splitting this nation into two nations. Such an ultimate victory would have spelt but one thing, meaning the victory of the South. It would have spelt but one thing, the emergence of an independent second nation, the Confederate States of America. The grave significance of the Pope's letter was also noted with anxiety, but by no less a personage than Abraham Lincoln, who commented, and what did Abraham Lincoln say about this letter that the Pope sent to Jefferson Davis? Abraham Lincoln said, "This letter of the Pope has entirely changed the nature and the ground of the war." And if you'll remember, in a previous video, I read a statement from Abraham Lincoln who said something like, "I see a cloud coming from across the Atlantic, and it's coming from Rome." Something very close to those words. William Henry Stewart, Lincoln's Secretary of State, spoke in a similar vein. He said, "The design of this quasi-recognition of Mr. Davis, who is thrice addressed as illustrious, quote-unquote, illustrious and honorable president, is manifest," he declared. "It is a last effort to get up some feeling against the North among the Catholics and to use perhaps the influence of the Holy Father to stop his Irish votaries from volunteering." The need for now, the writer of this book, Avro Manhattan, continues, "The need for volunteers was acute. The losses at the Battle of Gettysburg alone, if one considers the size of both sides, were enormous. It was a disaster for North and South alike. The Union Army lost more than 23,000 men. The Confederate forces even more, about 30,000. It was at this juncture that the Pope intervened once more in an effort to tip the balance in the favor of the South. Not on the battlefield to be sure. Okay, the Pope didn't go to the battlefield, of course, but in ways just as effective, even if more subtle. Moreover, it was the kind of intervention which could be repeated today or tomorrow in America. The effectiveness of the Vatican's secret machinations is something which has escaped the notice of politicians in the past, no less than those in our own day. Yeah, there's a lot of people who they don't notice the Vatican's secret machinations. Yet examples of its concreteness abound everywhere, including the United States. In another instance of the Church's effort to artfully aid the South, the hierarchy was active, sub rosa, in the mobilization of American Catholics against the military machine of the North. This was done by organizing the great draft riots in New York. Being the master of indirect, covert manipulation, the Church employed racial and other factors to achieve its objectives. Here, it promoted the real or imagined grievances of the Irish by mobilizing them against conscription of men deemed necessary for the urgent strengthening of the Union forces. It is significant that it took the Catholic Church on the spot only 10 days after the Battle of Gettysburg, from July 13th to July 17th, 1863, to attempt to sabotage the North in order to help the Confederates with whom the Vatican was openly sympathizing. On the 23rd of December in that same year, and only 1 month after the Pope had written the letter to Jefferson Davis, General Rufus King, the new American minister, arrived in Rome. In a letter which he wrote to State Secretary Seward, dated 15th January 1864, he related a significant remark made by Pope Pius IX. The Pope, wrote General King, after referring to the intervention in the Civil War, made the following comment, quote, "After intervening in your affairs, I have no weapon left but this pen." The Pope admits that his pen had the power to intervene, General King continued. It was the only weapon he had available to do so, so he himself states. General King then relates how the Pope had repeatedly stated that the Vatican would not intervene in the war. Quote, he had notice after notice that the United States government could not accept intervention, and that he had, just 36 days before, used that pen to write to Jefferson Davis, "Illustrious and honorable President." Yeah, he didn't intervene, but by writing this letter, he was intervening, and his pen was very powerful, which was in effect both recognition and intervention, and was designed to prevent enlistment of Roman Catholic Irishmen in the Union armies, as well as to get them to desert. The Vatican, in fact, managed to get them to do both, since many Catholics refused to fight for the North. Thousands of others deserted altogether. Unquote. The papal pen had proved more helpful to the South than if the Pope had sent whole battalions into the field. The truth of this assertion is clearly evident in the following statistics. And he has here, the writer of this book has a list of enlistment from 1861 to 1865 in the Northern armies. Okay? First of all is Native Americans. And this is astonishing. 1,523,000. And that's 75.48% of the Northern Army. Another group of enlistments, Germans, consist of 177,800. That's only 8.76%. Of the Irish, 144,200, and that's 7.14%. British American, 53,500. That's 2.60%. The English, 45,000. That's 2.26%. And other foreigners, 74,800, which comes to 3.76%. Now the desertions. Of the Germans, of this army that I just read to you, the numbers, the desertions from that army, 16% of them were Germans. Native Americans, only 0.5%. Irish, 72%. All others, 0.7%. 0.7%. The above figures indicate that out of every 10,000 Irish enlistees, almost all Catholics, there were over 33 times as many desertions as among all the other groups put together. The point to be made here is not only the historical one that the Vatican intervened in the agonies of the American Civil War, but that in a different context and in a different way, it can do the same in today's conflicts, be they military or political, and even more so in the future. Oh, my dear friends, I plead with everyone who is watching this video to study the subject of the Antichrist, not from the words of so-called authorities and theologians and ministers and such. Go back to the history of the Protestant Reformation. Most of, if not all of the prominent Protestant figures, ministers, like Martin Luther, John Knox, John Wesley, William Tyndale, all of these men, they understood that the Pope is Antichrist. This nation has had an enemy ever since its inception. This United States of America has had an enemy, and that is the Roman Catholic Church. What I'm saying, I'm not saying individual Catholics necessarily, but the Vatican. It is its mortal enemy, and it is determined it will bring this country to its knees. So I plead with everyone to study your Bibles and prepare, for the end of all things is at hand. If you agree with this presentation, then by all means tap that like button at the bottom of this video. And if you haven't subscribed, I would encourage all of you to subscribe. And if you have any comments or questions, please post them at the bottom of this video. Thank you for joining us here at Jewels of Truth. Have a good day.